Women give terrible advice to women. Women expect every one of their girlfriends to date Prince Charming. In other words, the guy has to be so stellar perfect, okay? The challenge is, there's no such thing as two perfectly aligned people. Sometimes we compromise our standards. Sometimes we compromise our character. When we compromise our standards and our character, that's a recipe for a disaster. The number one emotional health wound facing most human beings is I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, and I'm not likable.
Hey, John, thank you for being here, man. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of your videos that you have on YouTube, and you have some very just an interesting perspective when it comes to women specifically in the dating game that are a little bit older. But I want to know, 'cause I know that there are some similarities between, regardless of what your age is, there are similarities between younger women and older women when it comes to dating. What do you think is the biggest problem that people face today when it comes to dating and relationships?
Oh my God, that's such a loaded question. I mean, I could come up with 30 different problems.
Yeah.
One of the fundamental issues for most people, whether they're in their 20, well, you see, I do differentiate between people in their 20s and 30s versus 40s, 50s, or 60s. And let me explain why. A significant percentage of people 40 and older are most likely divorced, whereas people in their 20s and 30s are not divorced. People in their 20s and 30s are oftentimes possibly thinking about making babies and starting a family. And for those in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s, it's a whole different ball game. And for them, a lot of times they don't know what a relationship looks like outside of the container of a marriage. So I think first and foremost, most everybody is rather confused as to what they want. And as I said a moment ago, the container of a relationship of what they want.
Okay, so well, let's break it down to different age groups. Like,
Okay.
what are people specifically looking for in their 20s, their 30s, and their 40s and their 50s?
Well, so the 20s and 30s, typically speaking, if they're intentional about wanting to make babies and start a family, then a man or woman is going to look for an appropriate spouse for them. That's what they're geared towards. If they're just merely want a relationship without that focus, if you will, then it becomes rather confusing. Usually they hyper focus on the attraction piece and not the containment of what a relationship looks like. So that's what 20 and 30-year-olds. The 40, 50, and 60-year-olds who are divorced, I just lost you.
No, I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
Who are divorced, excuse me. A lot of times they want companionship, they want connection, they want sex, but not necessarily I'm going to keep repeating the word container, the container of a committed relationship. And a committed relationship has a lot more moving parts. It has some emotional responsibility. It has some, requirements of regular contact with one another. And so just to give you a few examples. So a lot of people are confused, coming back to what I said earlier, as to what they want.
So do you believe that people in the older dating range, they're looking for more casual relationships, would you say?
Women typically like the idea of a serious committed relationship. I mean, I think it's almost to some degree in their DNA. Now, I'm generally speaking here. Just
Okay.
for the most part, men enter into a relationship from a casual perspective, and then they might make the decision if they want something committed after a period of time, because they don't want to commit emotionally to a relationship, but they will certainly commit to the sexual aspects of a relationship pretty much at the beginning of a first date. And I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek.
Okay. So I'm guessing the women who are more in the older range, they've already been married. Is this a group you're
Yeah, I'm
typically
going to say
speaking with?
roughly, oh, excuse me. So 75%, and this is anecdotal, singles over 45 years old are most likely divorced. Okay. You have some widowers in that camp and you have some never married, but a significant percentage are divorced people. And already that comes with a predisposition. It could come with the predisposition of bitterness, anger, jadedness. So it could be predisposition of setting the bar too high or maybe setting the bar too low. So a lot of people after 45 who are in the single or who are single in the dating marketplace, there's a lot of confusion as to what they want.
I'm wondering, because I know that from my age group,
A lot of times people think of it in the 40,000 foot level of like, you know, candlelight walks on the beach, holding hands, yada, yada, instead of, hey, I need some help, drive me to the airport. Can you pick up my dry cleaning? Would you
yeah.
be, are you integrating into my life, or are we just companions with one another that just entertain one another?
Yeah, I see. I'm wondering, for the women that you're working with that have been divorced, do they typically date men like their ex-husband, or do they date men that they always kind of want to date, but they're afraid of what their social group would think?
The answer is yes, yes, and yes. And let me explain. Oftentimes, what they definitely don't want is their ex-husband, but they end up with someone like their ex-husband because they have a pattern of choosing emotionally unavailable men. They have a pattern of choosing narcissistic men. So they may not want to date their ex-husband, but they have a pattern of choosing men like that. Most of the time, people are choosing people that are very similar to one or both of their parents. In other words, they choose patterning similar to maybe the way they were raised because that's what they're familiar with. This is known as the imago. And Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt talk about this in the book, Getting the Love You Want. Talk about the imago, IMAGO, where we oftentimes choose people like one or both of our parents. This is subconsciously speaking, not consciously speaking.
And reason I asked you that question is because I know from my age group specifically, I want to say when we're in grade school, when we're in high school, for the majority of us, I feel like, at least I can speak for myself, we're our authentic selves. We are the person that God has made us to be, the universe has made us to be. We have no kind of social restrictions. We're free to just do what we want to do. But something happens when we get in our mid to late teens, even our 20s. We have an idea who we are in relationship to our group, who we are in relation to our family, and just who we are in relation to society. And because of that, we kind of conform or change the way we behave to fit into a specific standard. And in fitting in that standard, it impacts who we choose as a partner. So I'm wondering, like, do people as they get older, do they have a stronger sense of self? Do they know who they are? And because their sense of self is stronger, they kind of let go of those shackles that society has put on them, and they actually have a little bit more freedom? Or are they still haunted by the same shackles that they had in the past?
So really quickly, how old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay, 35, just so I had some context. So what typically happens for someone like, I'm of the baby boom Gen X period. I'm a tail end baby boomer. And I was raised to go to college, get a job, meet a girl, get married, buy a house, start a family. That was the blueprint that I was raised with, and I followed that blueprint. But I certainly didn't know how to be a husband when I got married. I really didn't know how to be a father. I didn't even know myself at that age. Okay. So then for the next 12 to 13 years, I'm in a marriage. It was rather unhappy for both of us. We split up. Now I had to unravel the tapestry of an old life and then reintegrate into myself. That took a couple years. And I was still very lost because I was lost before I got married, and I was rather lost after I got divorced. And for the next half decade or so, I was really trying to find out who I was as a person, quite frankly. Now, Alison Armstrong calls this period of time that men go through, this, we'll call it midlife crisis, as the tunnel. And that's kind of a period of time that can be a reawakening to who you are as a person. And for some people, that tunnel could be a couple years, and for some people, it could be decades before they really know who they are. I will say it took me a decade or two to really get a sense of who I am as a person, because coming back to what you said earlier, I was raised with a blueprint. We had society that has a blueprint of what we're supposed to be like. We have cultural blueprints of how we're supposed to be like, and trying to conform with people that very few people truly get a true sense of their own identity. And more importantly, if you've had traumas in your life, whether they were childhood traumas, and I don't mean like you were beaten as a child type of thing or sexual abuse. I'm talking garden variety traumas, and then the trauma of divorce, particularly for that over 45 category, it could take years to get a sense of who you are as a person.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, do you need to know who you are before you even join into the dating game? Should you take time to do that self-discovery, or is it okay to date and discover yourself?
You know, here's my belief system. I think most people are delusioned to who they are, but that is a conversation I could talk
Yeah.
about for hours. Sadly, the number one emotional health wound facing most human beings is I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, and I'm not likable. Usually they had childhood wounds or traumas that went unhealed. And even though they might have a sense of purpose in their life, they might have a sense of direction, they might be able to pay their bills on time, most people to some degree are suffering on the inside. And if you're suffering on the inside, you join up with someone else, they're going to suffer with you. So there's this phrase, you have to love yourself before you love another. Now, let me be clear about that. Loving yourself is an ongoing journey. You get full awareness 2 seconds before you die. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. So I think of, are you loving on yourself? And if you have a capacity to love on yourself, this self-love represents self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-reliance, a lot of those self-words. And you come with a cup that's at least partially full, then you can join up with someone else, hopefully, that's also come with a cup partially full. If you've got an empty cup and you meet someone else with an empty cup, do you know what that's called?
I would say a relationship built for hell.
Yeah, it's called drama. That's what it's
Close
called,
enough.
drama. When two empty cups meet each other.
Okay, I hear you. So you said a lot, and I understand where you're coming from, but I'm wondering, when it comes to self-love and you communicating that self-love, what role does boundaries play within relationships? Because I feel like when you set boundaries, that's a way of showing self-love. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love the way Brene Brown describes boundaries. She says boundaries are what's okay and what's not okay for me. So let's start with a standard in relationship. What is the standard you seek? Do you seek a standard where you speak to each other every day? Do you seek a standard where you see each other every other day or a couple times a week? What is the standard you seek in the context of we'll use romantic relationships? And the boundary is, are they meeting up with those? So you have a standard, then you get an agreement with another person as to whether or not what your standards are and my standards are. And when someone doesn't meet those standards, then the boundary comes in and it's a request to saying, hey, this is what we agreed to. You're not agreeing this anymore. I'm setting a boundary that's not okay for me. And if you want to continue in this dynamic, I need you to adhere to the standard we agreed to.
One of the things I see people doing is that they kind of change who they are to make the relationship work. And then while they're in the relationship, this other side of them starts to show over time. And it's like either them or the person they were dating, they become the person they really were in the first place, which kind of, prevents the relationship from even growing or being authentic enough to actually survive the long run.
No, I was going to say, the challenge is, there's no such thing as two perfectly aligned people. Relationships are going to come with some degree of, not compromise. And we also call this unconditional love or acceptance, because there isn't no such thing as a perfect person that's perfectly aligned to you. Sometimes we compromise our standards, okay? Sometimes we compromise our character. When we compromise our standards and our character, that's a recipe for a disaster. And when I say our character, we compromise in the area of integrity. We compromise in the area of trust because we have something good over here, and many people just hold so tight on this piece that they'll compromise some really critical areas like integrity, trust. And let me just say, trust isn't just about fidelity. Trust is, does this person truly have my best interest at heart? And sadly, many people are dating without even building solid trust in the relationship.
So what, if you want to build that strong kind of relationship, what kind of questions should you ask to actually build a healthy relationship before you jump into one?
I do a whole coaching program on that.
Oh,
So first you have to identify your compatibility with someone. And are you aligned in certain key areas of your life, particularly your values and everybody's values? Most people's values are somewhat similar, but to each person, it could be slightly different. One of the most important things to consider as if you're in midlife is, you know, does your lifestyle fit into my lifestyle? You know, like people typically by the time they get to 40, 50, or 60, they have lifestyles that are relatively cemented in. And so one of the questions you might want to ask is, are your lifestyles compatible? The really hard question to find out about is someone's emotional maturity and their relationship skills. And this is usually you have to find out about their past relationship experience. And you have to almost become a detective when you're listening to another person. And if you'd like, I'll give you an example of this. So you've met someone, they're divorced, okay? And you say, oh, what happened in your marriage? And let's say they literally throw their ex-partner under the bus. You can tell they're angry at this person. They're visibly upset. Maybe they're jaded. Maybe they're bitter. You know, they take no ownership to what caused the ending of the relationship. And I'm not to suggest that it could be a 90-10, you know, difference. But if you're hyper focused on that, then the question is, has this person even healed from their past relationship? Are they really in a good place if they have so much animosity about their past relationship? That is a gigantic red flag, because they're going to bring whatever wound they had in that past relationship, if they've gone unhealed, into any new relationship. And this is why second and third marriages end at rates 75% and higher, because they didn't heal the past. They just replaced it, which is, you know, replaced it for temporary, you know, joy and happiness, but they're going to butt heads later on down the road, most likely speaking.
yeah, I'm glad you brought the maturity aspect of relationships. I was actually I had a massage earlier today, and I was telling my masseuse, I was telling him, you know, for me personally, I feel like the biggest issue that at least people in our age group make when it comes to dating and relationships is that we qualify and we disqualify people way too fast. Like, when we're young, we'll look at something that's kind of like something small or something that you need to learn how to communicate. But we'll look at something that's small and we'll just say, okay, that person's not right for me. Or we'll see somebody that just checks all of our boxes. We're super attracted to them, and then we let all these red flags pass. We let our boundaries get crossed, and it's kind of like we don't ask the right questions. We don't communicate enough or take the time to really even build some kind of friendship before even taking the relationship to that direction.
That is so true. You know, we human beings are riddled with flaws. We're foible. We're imperfect. We make ridiculous decisions in our lives, particularly in the emotional area. I mean, some people do it in their physical world, but certainly in the emotional area, you know, humans make choices that, you know, will baffle any, you know, human behavior scientist, because the fact is most humans don't truly know how to regulate their emotions. Number one, we have a belief system centered around love that really is actually based on what's known as love attachment. And if you're not familiar with the book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, or the book Wired for Love by Dr. Stan Tatkin, these two books are excellent resources to learn how we actually attach to another human being in an unhealthy way, just like I was talking earlier about the imago. And then we find ourselves in relationships that don't bring us much joy and happiness, or even just basic contentment, because most humans have a weak sense of their self, a weak sense of regulating emotions. And most importantly, most humans have really poor relationship skills. And I say this, I might sound like a pessimist, but our divorce rate and our breakup rate prove that number over and over and over again.
Yeah. I think the divorce rate is high is because of the expectations we put on people to be in a relationship and the expectations we have for like ourselves. Like I said, a lot of people are going into relationships trying to fit into an image. They're playing a role. And obviously this is coming from somebody in their 30s, but they're playing a role. And that playing that role, it just ultimately that mask cracks and you kind of you don't even know yourself. You don't know why you're in that relationship. And then, it's just a slow fall from there. One of the things that kind of, has me scratching my head. Okay. In my age group, I want to say people are typically in the hookup phase or they're getting out of the hookup phase and they're looking to build a strong relationship with somebody that they can actually build a life with, getting serious. But the women that you're working with, they have gotten out of divorces and they're not necessarily looking to get married right away. So for me, that sounds like a casual relationship. So yes. But it's more serious than the average casual relationship. It's just not a hookup type of deal. They want to have somebody to spend time with, do things with, and also have sex with. What I'm wondering is, because they're not dating to get married, what are the types of steps or the types of questions that somebody needs to ask before they actually enter into a sexual relationship? Does an older crowd just start having sex just like the younger crowd, or do they ask a series of different questions to build this casual relationship?
Yeah, the challenge is this. If you don't have the intent, like you've just gotten a divorce and you're reluctant to get married. Okay, so now you enter into a relationship with someone. In other words, you met them, you have had a couple dates, you like each other, you start to have a physical, intimate relationship with each other, and you agree to monogamy and exclusivity, okay? But you're like, I don't know if I want to get married. Okay. Well, this creates a very confusing circumstance because if you're, say, 50 years old, do you want to just be dating for the next 40 years of your life? Is that what you want? Like, so, and they'll say like, oh, no, I want to eventually get married. Okay. Well, then is the person you're investing time with the person you want to get married with? Well, I don't know yet because I don't know them. Okay. Now, this is a lot of good questions. The challenge is when you're in a casual relationship, you can end it at any moment you want. You can just say, I'm done. I can go, so I can disappear. And by the way, certainly that can happen in a marriage, but there's a lot more moving parts to people that either move in together or getting married. There's more commitment associated with that relationship. When two people live in two separate residences and all they have is a handshake of, monogamy and exclusivity, the real question becomes, have they truly integrated into each other's lives? Have you really integrated? In other words, do you spend time with family and friends? Do you travel together? Do you go to social gatherings together? Do you help each other out from personal and professional levels? I don't know if I mentioned travel. These are the things along with emotional and physical intimacy. But there's a real integration. Well, what we see today is a lot of people that I say that they have most casual relationships is just a long drawn out version of friends with benefits. They occasionally have companionship. They occasionally have connection. They occasionally have sex with very little integration into each other's lives, because that integration builds the deep roots of trust. So you can go the distance potentially with this person. But if you don't integrate, then you can leave whenever you want, basically, because you have nothing vested in it. Oh, I do want to bring up one point, though. I meant to say this to you earlier. Why do arranged marriages have one of the highest success rates of most couples? Well, and I've spoken to a number of people, and there's about this, that arranged marriages have a higher rate of success. Well, why?
Let me guess. Let me guess.
Oh, good. Let's hear.
Let me guess. So is it because when you have an arranged marriage, you're going into it with, because your family has already vetted that person. Your families know each other. You guys have some kind of similar, I'm gonna say you have a similar culture and a similar belief system around family, relationships, and life. Is that,
Yep.
am I on in the right direction?
Yeah, you're on the right path. You know, the families, by the way, you're not just marrying a person, you're marrying into a family, and the family supports the relationship beyond the two of us. Here in the United States, you know, most people are just winging it. You know, they're just winging it. They're like, yeah, and by the way, given that most people don't even have a solid community around them, it makes for a very weak foundation when it's just two people having to hold the fort, if you will, versus, you know, it takes a village kind of thing.
You know, I was having a conversation with my friend about this about, say, a few months ago. And we're talking about arranged marriages. And I was telling him that, you know, I really didn't see a problem with it. And he pushed back. And what I told him, I was like, man, take a look at the women that we're dating. The women, a lot of times women won't date you unless their friends like you. You know what I'm saying? So they're getting advice from somebody that has no dating or relationship experience or very little. But at least if it's their parents, it's somebody that's going to be in their life for the rest of their life, and somebody who knows them on a way deeper level. A lot of times you exchange, you have some friendships last forever, some friendships last a few years, some last a few months. And I feel like a lot, men and women, people are, because they're so afraid of making the wrong decision, they let other people make they let the wrong people make the decisions for them. That makes sense.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to share a judgment. I'm going to own what I'm about to say. It's a bit of a projection or judgment. Women give terrible advice to women because women basically expect every one of their girlfriends to date Prince Charming. In other words, the guy has to be so stellar perfect, okay? And that person doesn't exist because men are flawed human beings. And so I think a lot of times women give bad advice to women based on that narrative. And that's just a judgment on my part.
Thanks for sharing. I think I would have to say so too. It's funny. I want to put this out there. We're talking about families and relationships. I was on somebody else's podcast, and it was a group of us, and they were talking about, you know, women. What is a good woman? Oh, she has purple hair, green hair. She's not a good woman. And I told him, I was like, man, you're delusional if you're going to judge a woman's value based off the color of her hair. I said, if you really want to get to know a woman and see who she's going to be within the relationship, you get to know her parents. You get to know her mother. You see how her mother treats her father, how the women in her family treat men just in general. But that'll give you the best idea of who she will be within that relationship, because we unconsciously take on the characteristics of our parents, like it or not. You know, that they're our first mentors. They teach us who we are and who we're supposed to be in relationship to other people.
So I just recorded a video this morning. It's going to come out in a few days. And I said, what's the most important thing to evaluate within a person when it comes to choosing a life partner? And I started with the phrase of, you know, have you ever heard, what's the number one thing you look for when you buy a house? Do you know the answer to that?
I bought a house and I have no idea what the answer is.
Okay, so it's always the same thing. Location, location, location. That's the most important thing in buying a house.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
the most important thing when it comes to choosing a life partner is character, character, character. The problem is most people don't really unpack that. So if you allow me a minute or two, I'll unpack that for your audience, because I'd like to take it a little bit deeper than just the word itself, character. So character, actions matching words, consistency. You know, now a person could make a mistake. Hey, I'm going to call you tonight and I fell asleep. You know, we're all human. We're going to make mistakes, but there's consistent actions match their words. Another aspect of character is you've healed your past relationships. You don't bring the trauma and drama from a past relationship into a new relationship. To me, good character represents a person who's generous, who's kind. They come from that place of abundance, and they don't come from a place of negativity. They come from a place of kindness. Person of good character, they communicate clearly without being right. In other words, it's not about being right. They communicate as a win-win type of communication. To me, that represents good character. They believe trust is paramount in relationship. And as I said earlier, trust isn't just about fidelity in relationship. Trust is your feelings matter to me as much as my own feelings matter to me. In other words, I am always looking out for your best interest. That's a fundamental in trust. And for a person with good character, that's a paramount in their life. They don't use people. In other words, if they are not clear about commitment, then they don't engage in casual relationships. They only engage in relationships where there's a potential for going the distance. They're not in it for the hookups, the short runs, the situationships, the friends with benefits. And again, this is my interpretation of good character. They have their act together. They're introspective. They do work on themselves. And lastly, amongst there's dozens more I could come up with, they have a level of empathy. They genuinely care about, they have empathy, humanity for others beyond themselves. They don't operate from a myopic, self-centric place. And that to me is the most important thing to consider when evaluating someone. I just said a mouthful.
Sounds like a very mature adult, which we get to be at certain stages in our life.
No, not everybody. It's not age, by the way. I know 20-year-olds that are far more adult than 60-year-olds.
Gotcha. Me as well. How do you find this high quality person? How do we find high quality partners?
Well, it starts by being what you want to attract. It's not as if these people are hanging out at the street corner or something like that. So how do you find them? First, be what you want to attract. Set the standard of what it is you want and eliminate people quickly that don't meet that standard. And the more you vibrate at that level of what you want to attract, you have a greater potential of attracting that into your life. But again, we're talking about, to be a real emotional grown-up takes a lot of introspective and inner work. And most people are lazy. You know, here in the United States, we are one of the, I mean, as much as we've accomplished and it's amazing what we've done, human beings can be incredibly lazy too, particularly in their romantic life. There's this Disney narrative that it should be easy. No, it's going to require effort. Herculean effort on some cases, but the reward is hopefully you find a partner that goes the distance with you.
Let's dive into that, because I was actually just watching a podcast and they were talking about relationships being difficult or being easy, and there were basically, there's people who believe that just like you, relationships are difficult, they're supposed to be difficult, but it's two people to work on those problems and build a healthy relationship. And there's some people who believe that when you have chemistry, the vibe is strong between the two of you, then things will flow easily within a relationship. Which one is correct? Like, what is the balance between the two?
Well, I want to be clear about something. If I intimated this, then let me retract that. The work is not, having to continually, if two people have friction and you're using sandpaper to smooth it out. I'm not remotely even suggesting that. The work is always individual work. It's learning to catch yourself, to catch your triggers, to not act in a righteous manner, to not act with criticism, to not act with contempt, to not stonewall your partner, and to not get defensive. So it's always inner work, two people doing inner work. Now, two people have done work, they're going to trigger each other. But if you're in a relationship where you're both all in, and this is, we should talk about this a little bit more, the concept of being all in. You're all in, and you say, okay, do we want to be right or do we want to be happy? And we might have a difference of opinion, and sometimes it's okay to disagree. It's okay to agree to disagree. Okay, that's okay too. But you listen to your partner's point of view, you acknowledge their point of view to them, and you accept their point of view as being true for them. And you both do this for each other. And you might hit an impasse, but that's okay. If you listen, acknowledge, and validate the person's point of view. A lot of times it's usually, I'm right, you're wrong. Most couples go into therapy, couples therapists, and it's always this. It's their fault. No, it's their fault. It's their fault. You see, they're not looking in the mirror. So coming back to your question, people that approach relationship based on chemistry is great. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like just feeling like off the charts connection with someone. But let me tell you, if you don't share the same values, if your lifestyles aren't blendable, and you aren't with someone who's emotionally constipated, it's going to be a lot more hell than the few moments of pleasure you get. So relationships in and of itself don't take work except for the work you do within yourself. That's my point of view.
It's a great answer. Become the person you want to attract.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I was reading a book by Henry Cloud. He wrote the book called Boundaries, and he also has a book called Boundaries and Relationships.
Okay.
And in that book, he always references God and Christians.
Okay.
But one of the things that stood out in his book that I hear in many different male dating books is that the importance of people dating more than one person. Now, he says not to have sex. So he's not talking about having sex with more than one person, but he says you should date more than one person, because a lot of times your ideal partner isn't the right partner for you. And you really don't learn that unless you really build some kind of friendship. You date, you meet their friends, etc. The people that you work with, how do you typically teach them to go about dating? I know there's not a one size fits all, but what is the path you suggest to them?
Well, I think just realistically speaking, you could go on, a person could go on 10 first dates in the next 10 weeks. And the chances are you're going to have chemistry with all 10 of them is highly unlikely. In fact, you might only have chemistry with a few of them. So it's just a natural byproduct that you might be meeting a number of different people. Okay. Now, where I have a difficulty is, let's say you begin dating one person, okay, and you like this person, you start investing time in this person. I'm not a big proponent of then dating another person and another person, another person. I just think that's disingenuous. I mean, unless you're both communicating that you're dating multiple people, but it's like watering it all down. I'd rather look. It's interesting. I'm gonna put a pause button here for a second. There's a show I'm fascinated with called Love is Blind. It's a reality show, and it's two people that connect in these pods, and you have to I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version of the premise of the show, but basically after a week or two of connecting with someone, you have to get engaged with one person. You get to actually meet them for the first time after you've got engaged. And then you go on a mini vacation with that person for 7 days. And the other people, there's a group of people have done this. And then you have to spend 8 weeks living with that person. And then you have to decide if you actually want to marry this person. Okay. All right. Put that in a box for a second. Why I brought this up is it's accelerating the process, but then for sure whether or not you want to truly invest with this person. I'd like to think if we devote our time and energy to one person in 10 dates. If you've gone on 10 dates with someone and you feel like you want to explore a relationship with them, then explore a relationship. But if you're doing that with multiple people, it's going to be watering down and convoluting. It's going to be very convoluted. That's just my opinion anyway.
Well, it's going to be really difficult to do it when you have a job and, activities like we have. It's hard to balance.
But what's interesting commentary is you really don't get to know a person until you live with them. I've known people that have dated for 3 years. They moved in together and it imploded within 3 months. Wouldn't you rather have known that 3 years sooner? I'm just putting it out there. Maybe what we should be doing is accelerating the process instead of this long drawn out friends with benefits version of dating that we currently is our current dating model. Just a hypothesis, by the way.
I have experience I want to share. I feel like people need to be intentional in their dating. I think that I had a really good friendship with a woman for a decade. I would speak at least once a week or once every 2 weeks. We spoke pretty frequently. We both had relationships, know her from college. We slept in the same bed before. I've dated her friends. Never did anything, never touched this woman, never did anything of the such. But Went to go visit her in Germany, and then she fell in love with me.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that. We had a good we had a great friendship. But the thing was is that I didn't know that she had fallen in love with me, and she started treating me the way she treats her crushes, which unfortunately isn't healthy. It's very argumentative, really name calling, nasty. And I had no idea what was going on. And I'm just like, what in the hell? And she told me after I returned back to the States, like, hey, I have these feelings for you, yada yada. But she couldn't break out of character because of she hadn't done the work that she hadn't done the internal work to handle the insecurity she had around relationships, which is why she was acting
Got
that
it.
way. I say that to say this is that I feel like if people went into a situation not only building that type of friendship, but also letting that person know, like, hey, I like you, I want to build a relationship with you, might want to take the time to get to know you. Being intentional is going to help expose those different traits of that person early on in the dating, so that situations like that happen to me, or situations that happen to the person that you just gave in that example of them moving in, they kind of they learn that a lot sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, realistically speaking, what I'm proposing is not logistically viable, but it's just a hypothesis I have is that, we'd be better served accelerating the process. But most importantly, what I'm really saying is being intentional and being mindful of your words, being mindful of your actions, that our actions have emotional consequences to another human being. When I shoot my videos, I tell my audience that I'm your big brother. If I could be there on a first date, I'd have a shotgun pointed at the guy's face and I'd say, "What's your intentions with my little sister?" The reference there is that your actions has consequence to someone I care about. And if you're going to be disingenuous, if you're going to be manipulative, if you're going to be insensitive, I'm going to shoot you in the ass for that. Okay. But what that does is it forces someone to be mindful. Today, there are no consequences for bad behavior. There are no consequences for leading someone on. There are no consequences for ghosting someone. And yet, the emotional ripple effect of that can be quite devastating to someone's emotional well being. Now, you're not responsible for someone's emotional well being, but isn't a person of good character actually, they take care of the people around them? If the minute they engage with someone, aren't they going to have a level of treating people with respect? And so I'm a big advocate of being intentional, and that means having more difficult conversations early on, talking about sex before you have sex. In other words, not engage in it and then try to figure it out. Have a few conversations about what sex means to you. Does it mean, like for me, it means if I'm going to be physically intimate with someone and I want to explore a relationship, I would like us to both agree to monogamy and exclusivity. In other words, monogamy, don't sleep with anyone else, and exclusivity mean don't engage with talking to other people while we're in this. And that's a conversation. That's being intentional. Commitment might mean, hey, you know what? Let's make sure we talk to each other once a day to check in if we don't physically see each other. That's demonstrating a level of commitment to the relationship. These are the things that should be talked about. But today, younger people are ridiculously cavalier. I mean, they have no conversations whatsoever. And for the demographic I speak to, they've been indoctrinated that men are the leaders of the relationship, so they have to follow the man's lead. And I'm like, you're giving the job to the wrong person. Your relationship destiny is not in someone else's hands, it's in your own hands.
The last statement that you made was really powerful, because there's a lot of guys on the internet. There's a lot of guys on the internet right now talking about, like, a man is made to lead, women are made to follow. And I
The
actually
red
had a
pill
guy on my
community.
huh?
The red pill community.
Yeah, and I had a guy on my show, and it's somebody that I look up to. I see him as a mentor of mine. And he kind of he basically agreed with that statement. And one of the things I mentioned to him was that, if you take a look at ancient societies, the Greeks, for example, they had a variety of different archetypes for women. They had the woman that was like the queen of love, the goddess of love, and then they had the woman that was the goddess of war. But they had the counterpart male god, which was the god of war. You had Athena, the goddess of war. Then you had I can't remember the god of war in Greek mythology, but
Aries.
Aries. The point that I'm making is that each man and woman had these feminine and masculine archetypes that they can live up to. And it seems like in today's society, women only have one archetype. Man is above. Men are represented, you know, we're represented as the kings, we're at the top, and women are our servants. And from my experience, there are women who make great leaders, and there are men who make great leaders, and there are men who can't lead for shit, and they need somebody to hold their hand. And it's the same thing for some women. So I'm not sure if it's a one size fits all, or we're supposed to play these certain roles. But I think it falls down to back to what you said originally, is that you have to really know yourself and know what kind of relationship you fit into.
Well, you know, when we look in history, you know, women, you know, it's been quite a patriarchal society for the most part. And quite frankly, for the most part, women in many cases were treated like property, like chattel, that like second-class citizens. So it plays into a narrative: the man is above and the woman is below, and the woman must submit to a man. You know, I'm an advocate of personal empowerment. I'm an advocate of individual empowerment. The fact is, we have a divorce rate of first marriages at 50%, second and third marriages at 75%. We see a lot of men who are rather broken in the dating marketplace. They're rather clueless. So and I'm an advocate for women. I wouldn't want to give the job of leadership to a person that you don't trust yet, okay, that hasn't actually earned it and actually is capable of the job. So if we start with that narrative from the very first date, you're possibly setting yourself up for failure. And what that does is it sets someone up for narcissism. If they're in charge, then it's my way or the highway is the potential pathway. I'm not saying always, but potential. I'm a big proponent of co-creating a relationship, of two people, you know, equally investing into the relationship, equally making choices within the relationship, how it relates to the relationship, equally making agreements. And some people, you know, there are certain people, you have to use their strengths and weakness. If one person's strength is maybe driving the car, then let them drive the car. If another person's strength is cleaning the house, then let them do that, or you do it together type of thing. But the point is some strengths, and within a relationship, you should leverage your strengths for the betterment of the relationship, but not in a one up, one down, submit. I'm not a big proponent of that.
Agreed. I was reading, I can't remember the name of the book, but I was reading a book and it was stating that the importance of roles in relationship. And by roles, it doesn't mean like sticking to traditional gender roles, but it's important to know how you fit, what your contribution is in the relationship, and how that person's fit. You said that you gave the example of maybe we both clean, we both do this. I know growing up, I had to clean up everything. My mom, she felt like when she had kids, we became her servants. We had to do everything and she was going to chill out.
Yeah.
So that's how my household was. I have you for 5 more minutes. I want to make sure I ask you a few more questions.
Sure.
How do you know when do you know you should end the relationship or stay in it and keep trying?
You know, that's a tough one. I think what's most important, if two people are not happy with each other, then have a conversation about what is causing the unhappiness, and see if you can't find a way to resolve that together. I think it's important to constantly make adjustments in your relationship. I think healthy relationships are okay. I was just thinking about something a moment ago. I was thinking about two lawyers that partner together. And two good lawyers that partner together, and we're going to be the kick-ass law firm, okay? And they each week have a weekly meeting about the health of the partnership, and not the two of them, but the agency within the context of who they're serving. And they have these weekly meetings, and they make adjustments for one another. It's the same in a romantic relationship. Have a state of a union within your relationship. Can make adjustments along the way, because oftentimes they wait till something is so almost past the deadline of saving it, and then making last ditch efforts, when if maybe people went into the early stage of the relationship having the tough conversations, talking about sex, talking about money, talking about the importance of keeping your physical health up for the health of the relationship, talking about the things that might trigger you, talk about your past relationships so it doesn't bleed into a relationship. If you have residue from a past relationship, have these conversations and then be intentional about integrating into each other's lives and have regular State of the Union meetings with each other. That's what I'd rather people do, versus waiting till the last minute to try to resurrect something that's probably past its deadline, if you will.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you for doing the show with me. I'm going to have to end it here. I apologize for having the technical difficulties.
Okay.
At the beginning, I had no idea what was going on. I just have another meeting like right after this, so that's why. But we're going to have to do it again sometime in the future, and I can really finish my list of questions. But is there any kind of close? I got one for you. If you had to give any kind of advice, what would be your philosophy when it comes to life?
I'm a big, I wrote a book, you can see it behind me, called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? It's a journey of personal development, self-help, and spiritual work. I'm a big proponent of individuals being introspective, maybe seeking therapy, doing personal development, doing spiritual work to find a way to inner peace, to contentment, and do whatever it takes to get there. I'm a big proponent of doing work because the beauty of it is I think you have a happier life when you do individual work. And I'm a big proponent of that.
Agreed. Jonathan, thanks for having you. And I'll catch you next time, man. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good one.